For this lesson, we're going to be talking about multiplication once again with hundredths. However, we're going to be doing this in the more complicated version of multiplication. And this will really give you an understanding of why, in the previous lesson that we were talking about, why the multiplication gets really, really simple. Why we can just assume that this number, simply we could do 845 times 8 as opposed to 8.45 times 8. Now, as we mentioned before in 3-digit by 1-digit multiplication, you could break this down into expanded form. Now, breaking down 8.45 into expanded form is pretty foreign compared to the way we did it with whole numbers. So if we did, again, if we were ignoring this decimal right here and we did 845, we could break it down as 800 plus 40 plus 5. Now, we're not ignoring this right now because we're learning how to understand multiplying with decimals. We're going to break this down again into expanded form. Now, it's going to be different. Since the ones column is at the beginning, and we're going now less than 1 because we have decimals, we're going to have to do this completely different. So, we have 8.5, and the first number is just going to be 8 because it's in the ones column. There's no 0 behind it. If we break this down, what are we going to add to the 8? We need to add the number that's in the tenths column, which is the 4. So the way we're going to be adding it is actually 0.4. And then the third thing that we're adding to it is the 5, but it is actually, once again, 0.05. So it is an object that has been chopped up into 100 pieces, and we have 5 of them. So this is an expanded form for decimals. Okay, now let's keep that in mind because we're going to be multiplying these numbers once again. And just like any multiplication, we're always going to deal with the smallest number first. Traditionally, we're always doing the ones column, but right now, the ones column is the largest number out of all of these. We have 8 whole numbers. Over here, we only have 4/10ths, and over here, we have 5 100ths. So, the smallest number over here is the 5 100ths. And once again, we're just going to be multiplying from the right to the left. Now, we could do this the same method in the long way. So we're going to do 8 times 5. Now, we have to remember that it is actually 8 times 0.05. Now we're going to be doing with 2 decimals here. So the first thing we're actually doing, as opposed to before where we can multiply with a 0, we're actually doing the multiplication first. So we have 8 times 5, which is going to be 40. However, we have 2 decimals that we need to do. So we're going to have to move this decimal twice over because we need to multiply the 8 by the 0 and the 8 by the second 0. So we actually have 0.40. Okay? Now, the second way, now we have to multiply the tenths going across. And if we take a look here, it's 0.40. And we're going to be multiplying our 8 once again by the 4, but it's in a different spot over here. So we have our 8, and we're multiplying by 0.4. Now, to make this easier, it's important that we change this into an equivalent decimal, which is adding a 0 at the back so we don't get confused. So we could keep all the decimals in line. 2 numbers behind the decimal because we're dealing with 2 numbers behind the decimal. Okay, so we have 8 times 0.40. We're going to do our first thing. So we have 8 times 0, which is our 0 over here. Then we have 8 times 4, which is 32. And then we have our 0 over here, which is 0. Now, we've reached the decimal, and the decimal has to go after the tenths. We're always keeping these decimals in line over here. So we can see now that we have 3.20. Now, our last multiplication is going across once again to the 8ths. Well, sorry, not the 8ths, but is the 8 in the ones column. And we're multiplying our 8 once again, but this time by 8, a whole 8. Now, as I said before, it's important to keep consistent with what we're doing, always with two numbers behind the decimal. So, we could change this because it's equivalent to 8.00. 8.00 is the same as 8, or 8.0, or 8 point infinite zeros. At the end, it's only going to be 8 whole numbers. So over here, we're going to go 8 times 0. We have our 2 zeros at the back. 8 times 0. We've now reached our decimal, which is always going to be in line. And now we could do our 8 times 8, which is 64. Okay? And now you could see how everything is now aligned in their place value. So we have our hundredths over here. We have our tenths aligned over here. We have our decimals all in the correct spots. We have our ones, and we've reached over to our tens column. Now we're going to add it all up. So we have 0 at the end. We have 6. We make sure that our decimal comes back down. And we have 7 and 6. So we have an answer of 67.60. So if we take a look at this method, it's the same way as doing 3-digit by 1-digit multiplication. However, it's a little different because we're dealing with a different expanded form that breaks away from what we've been learning in earlier grades. So we're doing our 8 times 0.05, our 8 times 0.40, and then our 8.00 times 8, always going across. So it's always important over here to align our decimals. Always be consistent because we're dealing with two numbers behind the decimal. So add those zeros in so you don't get confused with your multiplication.